They said the ranch was worthless, just a rotting patch of land sold off for a single dollar. But when a young ranger stepped inside the abandoned stables, she didn't find dust and silence. She found a colossal black mare, half-starved, scarred, and trembling, with a swollen belly that told a darker secret. What began as a simple rescue would unravel a past of betrayal, cruelty, and survival, and reveal that some ghosts don't haunt with chains or whispers, but with hooves. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. The wind cut low across the Wyoming high country, rattling dry pine needles and carrying with it the first bite of winter. The town of Cedar Hollow population, just under 3,000, seemed to shrink when the seasons turned. Storefronts closed, early streetlights flickered in the chill dusk, and the wide valley that surrounded it sank into long shadows. Out here, late autumn didn't arrive with the burnished golds of postcards. It arrived with frost crawling across the windowsills and a silence that carried weight. Claire Dawson knew that silence better than most. At 32, she had already lived a lifetime of noise, crackling radios, shouting voices, the roar of fire, devouring timber in the mountains she had sworn to protect. 3 years ago, she'd stood on a ridge, her lungs filled with smoke, watching flames tear through a forest, while her unit scrambled to evacuate hikers. She remembered the sound of a horse screaming somewhere in the inferno, remembered the way her partner's hand had slipped from hers when the flames cut between them. Some nights, she still woke choking hearing that sound. The scars weren't visible. Her skin was unmarked except for a faint line above her wrist. But her eyes, once bright and sharp, had settled into something harder. People said she looked older than 32. She supposed they weren't wrong. When she looked in the mirror each morning tying her ranger's jacket, she didn't see youth. She saw a woman who kept moving because stopping meant remembering. Cedar Hollow had offered her anonymity when she transferred. A small ranger station paperwork, patrolling trails that rarely saw more than hunters or curious tourists. The locals nodded politely, but kept to themselves. That was fine by her. She didn't need friends. She needed space. She needed something to anchor her again. That something came in the form of a line buried in the county records, Echo Valley Ranch. Forfeited property. Abandoned for over 15 years, the ranch had fallen into the county's lap after back taxes went unpaid, the owners never resurfacing. Most folks considered it cursed ground. Some whispered about missing animals, about a young woman who had vanished. Others said it was just a failed horse ranch, unlucky and forgotten. What caught Claire's attention was the price, $1. The clerk at the county office had shrugged when she asked. It's all legal. Asset disposal. Honestly, Ranger Dawson, we'd be glad if someone did something with it. Place is rotting. So she signed the papers. $1 exchanged hands, and suddenly she owned a stretch of land at the edge of the valley, a property most wouldn't take for free. When word got out, Cedar Hollow reacted predictably. At the cafe on Main, she overheard a rancher mutter, "Only a fool buys that place." Nothing but trouble out there. Old Mrs. Harlow, who ran the quilting shop, had shaken her head when Claire passed by. "You watch yourself, girl. Folks disappeared out there. Horses too. That ground doesn't forget." Claire smiled politely, said nothing. She didn't believe in curses. But in the quiet part of her chest, the part that still ached from smoke and loss, she admitted she was drawn to the challenge. If the ranch was broken, maybe fixing it could fix something in her too. Echo Valley Ranch sat on the far edge of town, where the land began to climb toward the tree line. The dirt road that led to it had eroded into gravel weeds pushing up through the cracks. When Claire parked her dusty government-issued Jeep at the gate, she stood for a long moment surveying her purchase. The house itself slouched against the horizon. The roof sagged in two places, shingles missing like teeth from a broken jaw. Paint peeled in long strips, revealing weather-gray wood. The front porch leaned forward. One post snapped the whole structure, resembling an old man trying to stand against the wind. To the left stretched the barn and stable. Boards gaped where nails had worked loose, and rust had chewed the hinges of the great sliding door. The smell of mildew and rotting hay drifted even before she stepped inside. Fences that had once enclosed pastures were nothing more than splintered rails collapsed under years of storms. Yet something about the place stopped her from turning away. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick-layered, like the air itself remembered. She felt it in her chest, the way she used to feel just before stepping into a forest fire. The certainty that something had happened here, and that the ground had not forgotten. She pulled her jacket tighter, slung her duffel over her shoulder, and walked toward the barn. The first door she touched groaned against rusted hinges. Metal squealed, the sound shivering down her spine. She raised her flashlight, its beam slicing through the gloom. Dust swirled like pale smoke in the cone of light. Inside, the air was damp and stale. Stacks of warped boards leaned against the wall, and a tangle of rope lay moldering in the dirt. Old cages, dog crates maybe, or makeshift pens were piled in a corner, their bars bent, doors twisted. Claire frowned. A barn should smell of hay and animals, even long abandoned. This one smelled only of neglect. Too quiet, too still, as though someone had sealed it up and turned the key on purpose. She stepped further inside, her boots crunching on straw that disintegrated to dust. Her beam swept across sagging rafters, spider webs like lace, the faint scurrying of mice in the walls. Nothing unusual, she told herself. Just abandonment. Then she heard it. A sound so faint she thought at first it was the wind, low, rough breathing, not the scuttle of vermin or the groan of timber. This was heavier, labored, like lungs dragging air through exhaustion. She froze. Her hand slid unconsciously to the holster at her hip, where her sidearm rested. Slowly, she tilted the flashlight toward the back corner of the barn. At first, it looked like a heap of shadows, maybe a collapsed tarp. But then, it shifted. Her light caught an eye golden wide, reflecting back at her like a shard of flame in the dark. The shape resolved a horse. It stood taller than any mare she had seen, its coat, once jet black, now dulled with dirt and neglect. Tangled hair hung in ropes down its neck, matted with burrs. Ribs jutted beneath the skin, every bone sharp against stretched hide. But it was the belly that made her breath hitch. Swollen, taut, trembling with occasional spasms, pregnant. The animal swayed on unsteady legs, then dropped to its knees, sides heaving. Yet its head remained high, ears pinned back, eyes locked on her with equal parts fear and defiance. Claire took an involuntary step backward, and the beam wobbling. The horse flinched at the movement, as if expecting a blow. Her throat tightened. She'd seen wild mustangs before, tough, scarred creatures of the plains, but this was different. This animal had been broken by something cruel, yet it hadn't given up. Not yet. Lowering the flashlight so it wouldn't blind, she softened her stance. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. Easy, girl. I'm not here to hurt you. The horse's ears twitched, muscles still taut, but it didn't retreat further. It simply stared sides, shuddering. Claire eased forward a single step, then another, keeping her movement slow. Her heart hammered, but she forced her breathing steady. She crouched, bringing herself lower, less threatening. The air between them was heavy with dust and something else, a tension that felt like recognition. The mare let out a rough, rasping snort and then shifted her weight. For a moment, Claire thought she would collapse. Instead, the animal braced, trembling but unyielding eyes never leaving hers. Something in that gaze rooted Claire to the spot. It wasn't just fear, it was memory, pain, a question unspoken of whether this stranger would be like the ones before. She swallowed hard. In the echoing silence of the barn, beneath the weight of shadows and dust, Claire felt something stir inside her chest, something that had been absent since the fire. Hope. She stayed like that for a long moment, crouched in the dim barn and the flashlight casting a pale halo around them. Time seemed suspended, and the howl of wind outside muted the dust hanging still in the air. And then, without meaning to, she whispered, "You're safe now." The words surprised her as much as they seemed to startle the horse. But she didn't take them back. Because even as she said them, she knew they were a promise not only to the mare, but to herself. For the first time in years, she felt the possibility of purpose again. And it stood before her, scarred, starved, and carrying life in its belly. Claire hadn't slept much the night she found the mare. The image of the animal's hollow eyes, her trembling sides, the unnatural swell of her belly, all of it burned itself into her mind. Lying on the sagging couch in the front room, she'd stared at the cracked ceiling until dawn, knowing she couldn't leave the creature alone another day. By morning, she had made her decision. She pulled her phone from the counter, scrolled past the sparse contacts she had in Cedar Hollow, and stopped at the only name that mattered, Dr. Evelyn Ross. Evelyn wasn't just the town vet. She was one of those figures everyone knew, sharp-tongued, sharp-eyed, and honest to the point of brutality. She had once worked in a Navajo-run animal clinic down south before an accident with a panicked stallion left her with a limp that never healed. Most people would have retired. Evelyn simply learned to walk slower and to make everyone else catch up to her mind instead of her legs. When Claire called, the line crackled with static. Evelyn answered with a gruff, "Ross." "It's Claire Dawson," Claire said quickly. "I need you out at Echo Valley Ranch." There was a pause on the other end, long enough that Claire thought the call had dropped. Then Evelyn said, "That place, what for? I found a horse in the barn," Claire admitted. Bad shape, pregnant. Another beat of silence, then the scrape of chair legs. "Stay with her. I'll be there in 20. Evelyn arrived in her old station wagon, the rear, loaded with crates of supplies and a battered medical kit. She stepped out slowly, favoring her left leg, her frame lean and wiry inside a heavy canvas coat. Her dark hair, streaked with gray, was tied back, and her eyes, sharp as flint, swept the barn before she even spoke. Claire led her inside. The mare stood where she had been, still tense, still watching. Evelyn stopped dead the moment she saw her. "Where the hell did you find her?" "Locked in my barn," Claire said, voice dry. Then she added almost reluctantly, or maybe she locked herself in. The older woman shot her a look, half disbelief, half respect for the odd possibility. She clicked her tongue and approached, slowly speaking in low murmurs to the animal. The mare's ears twitched, nostrils flaring, but she didn't rear. Evelyn had a presence that stilled, even frightened things. She knelt stiffly, hands careful, and began her examination right there on the straw. The list of injuries came steadily, each one another weight in Claire's chest. "Severe malnutrition," Evelyn muttered, running fingers lightly across the jutting ribs. "See that she's been without steady feed for months, maybe longer." Her hand traveled down the mare's flank, pausing on the ragged patches of hair and raw skin. Burn marks. Not fresh, but deep enough. Rope scars around the neck, too. Someone kept her chained. She touched the welted ridges along the shoulder, her mouth tightening, and whipped her more than once. Claire clenched her jaw, the sting of anger climbing her throat. She'd seen cruelty in the wild, hunters leaving traps, campers abandoning pets, but this was different. This was systematic. Finally, Evelyn stepped back and gestured toward the mare's belly, round and taut beneath the thin hide. She's heavy with foal. Close to term, I'd guess. Weeks, maybe days. Claire exhaled. So she ran until she couldn't run anymore. Evelyn straightened slowly, her limp more pronounced after kneeling. Her eyes narrowed at the mare, but her voice was quiet. These are not accidents. Someone kept her chained and used her. Claire looked back at the animal, and what she felt wasn't just sympathy. It was fury, hot and cold, at once. Whoever had done this hadn't just hurt a horse. They'd broken something innocent and expected no one to notice. Hours passed with them working side by side. Evelyn cleaned wounds, gave injections, set up a drip for fluids. Claire held the mare steady, her hands firm on the sweating neck, whispering soft words. The animal trembled, but did not fight. At one point, Claire brushed a strand of tangled mane from the mare's eyes and said almost without thinking, "Midnight." Evelyn glanced up. "What her name?" Claire murmured. "She needs one. Midnight. Black as the sky." The vet's lips twitched into something almost like a smile. A strong name. Maybe it'll keep her alive. Claire felt the weight of the word as she repeated it in her mind. Midnight. No longer just a broken creature in the dark. She was someone. And Claire realized with a small jolt that she had crossed a line. She wasn't just sheltering an animal. She was making a promise to her. Later, after Evelyn left with instructions and the promise to return the next day, Claire rolled up her sleeves and turned to the barn. If Midnight was going to survive here, the place needed to be more than a tomb. She dragged out rotted bales of hay, swept away mold, repaired what boards she could with hammer and nails she found in the shed. As the light waned, she worked deeper into the shadows until she reached a dark corner behind a stack of warped planks. Something metal gleamed faintly. Pushing the boards aside, she uncovered a length of rusted chain, its links thick, one end still bolted into the floor. She followed it with her hand, grimacing, as flakes of rust crumbled beneath her touch. Nearby sat a small iron cage, barely large enough for a dog, certainly not a horse. Its bars were bent inward, as though something had thrashed against them in desperation. The sight chilled her. This wasn't a barn for keeping. This was a barn for holding. Then her fingers brushed paper. She pulled free a photograph. Edges, curled colors faded, but still visible. A young woman smiled from the picture, her dark hair tossed by wind, her arm draped over the neck of a horse, sleek, strong, unmistakably, the same mare years younger and unscarred. Midnight. On the back scrawled in smudged ink, Elena and Midnight. Spring Festival. Claire stared at it, her throat tight. Whoever this Elena was, she had loved the horse. And something terrible had torn them apart. That night, Claire couldn't shake the image. She left Midnight resting with fresh water and hay, then walked down the gravel road to the nearest neighboring property, a farmhouse half hidden behind rows of pines. An elderly woman tended to a small garden, even in the chill evening, her back straight, despite her age. Mrs. Carver, Claire called as she approached. The woman looked up sharp-eyed, her cropped silver hair catching the light. "You must be Dawson, the ranger who bought the cursed ranch." Claire almost smiled. "I was hoping you might help me. I found this." She held out the photo. Mrs. Carver took it with weathered hands. The expression that crossed her face was not surprise, but sorrow. "You knew her, didn't you?" Claire asked softly. "Elena Gray." The old woman sighed heavily. Everyone knew Elena. sweet girl, loved horses more than herself. She tapped the image with one finger. That mare Midnight was her pride. Strong, gentle, could have won shows if Elena had cared about ribbons. But she only cared about giving strays a place to belong. What happened to her Carver's mouth hardened. She wanted to turn Echo Valley into a rescue. She was doing it too, took in Mustang's abandoned stock. Then he showed up. Who? Jake Holloway. Carver spat the name like it tasted foul. A drifter with money. Claimed he'd bankroll her dreams. For a while it looked like he did. New fencing, new trailers. But then, doors shut. Elena stopped coming to town. Horses vanished. And one day she was gone too. Claire's chest tightened. People thought she left, that's what the sheriff said, that she'd failed and couldn't face it. But I never believed that. Carver's eyes flashed. That girl wouldn't leave her horses, not her Midnight. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke. Claire looked at the photo again, the joy on Elena's face, the strength of the horse at her side. She thought of the scarred creature trembling in her barn and the rusted chain still bolted to the floor. No, Elena hadn't left by choice. Something darker had swallowed her, and Midnight was the only one who had come back. Claire walked home with the photo tucked in her pocket, her steps heavy. The sky above Cedar Hollow was already turning purple, the stars beginning to spark through. In the barn, Midnight lifted her head when Claire returned her eyes, reflecting the lantern light. Claire moved closer, brushing a hand across the mare's damp coat. "We'll find out what happened," she murmured. "I swear it." The mare leaned slightly into her touch, and for the first time since stepping onto the cursed property, Claire felt the faint thread of connection tighten. She wasn't alone in this. Midnight carried secrets, and together they would untangle them. The days that followed blurred together into a routine of feeding, cleaning, and watching. Midnight was still fragile, but she had begun to respond, eating more steadily, lifting her head, when Claire entered the barn, even letting her brush some of the tangles from her mane. For a moment, Claire dared to believe things were stabilizing. But the nights told a different story. It began with small noises, an extra creak of wood, the faint clatter of something shifting against the fence. At first, Claire blamed the wind. The Echo Valley always carried sounds, strangely bouncing echoes off the slopes, until you could swear someone was walking just beyond the trees. But Midnight knew better. Each time the noises came, the mare would stiffen ears, swiveling sharply, nostrils flaring. Sometimes she would stamp her hooves so hard the planks of the stall rattled, letting out short, sharp whinnies. It wasn't the restless agitation of an animal adjusting to new surroundings. It was fear sharpened and immediate. Claire sat on the porch one night, a mug of cooling coffee in her hands, the moon a thin shard above the valley. When the old fence groaned again, wood under weight, not wind, she set the cup down and slid her revolver from its holster. The steel was cold in her palm. She stepped into the yard's boots, crunching frost. Her flashlight beam swept across the weeds over the broken fence posts into the darkness of the tree line. Nothing moved. Only the hiss of wind in the pines answered her. For several minutes, she stood there breathing slow, straining to hear. Then she turned back. Midnight was pacing sides, heaving hooves striking the straw, as if she'd been trying to drive something invisible away. Claire whispered under her breath, "Maybe I'm imagining it." But the doubt tasted bitter. The next morning, with the sun a pale disk above the ridge, she circled the property. Near the northern fence, she stopped. There, pressed into the damp earth, was the outline of a boot. Large, deep, crisp, enough to know it wasn't from years past. A man's boot. Her stomach tightened. She knelt and brushed soil away, tracing the edges. Whoever it was had stood here not long ago watching. A few feet away, something glinted in the grass. She picked it up. A cartridge case, corroded but unmistakable. A bullet casing. Claire turned it over in her hand, and the metal leaving a rusty smear on her palm. Not new, but not ancient either. Someone had fired a weapon near the ranch, or left this behind on purpose. She took it straight to Dr. Evelyn Ross that afternoon. The vet studied it under the clinic's bright lights, frowning. "This is not a hunter's mistake," Evelyn said, voice flat. "Too close to your property. Hunters don't leave casings where they shoot, they collect them. Someone's marking territory." Claire felt her throat tighten. Marking what midnight? The older woman's eyes softened, though her mouth stayed grim. Horses like her don't just vanish. Someone wants her back. Be careful, Claire. 2 days later, while carrying buckets of water to the barn, Claire noticed movement along the fence. Not the tall outline of a man this time, but a smaller shape crouched, watching the barn with unguarded curiosity. "Hey," Claire called. The figure startled, then stepped forward. A girl. Red hair tumbled out from under a hood, freckles spattered across her nose. She couldn't have been more than 14. I wasn't spying," the girl stammered. "I just wanted to see her." "Who are you?" Claire asked, lowering the bucket but keeping her tone firm. "Emily. Emily Hart. We live over there." She pointed vaguely toward the east ridge, where another patch of farmland spread behind tangled fences. Claire studied her, the too large hoodie, the notebook clutched tight against her chest, its pages stained with pencil smudges. Curiosity glowed brighter than fear in the girl's eyes. "You've been sneaking around here?" Claire asked. Emily flushed. "Not really. I heard someone found a horse here, and I had to see." She took a hesitant step closer, eyes wide, when they landed on the dark mare inside the stall. Midnight snorted softly, ears twitching but didn't shy away. Emily whispered almost reverently, "She's beautiful, even with the scars." Claire's stance softened. She remembered being that age, feeling the same magnetic pull toward creatures bigger and wilder than herself. Her name's Midnight. The girl's expression flickered sadness, washing over curiosity. "I've seen him," she whispered suddenly. Claire frowned. Seen who? Emily's fingers tightened on her notebook. "A man. Tall. Black jacket. He used to come around here. Before..." Her voice caught. "Before my pony disappeared." Claire's pulse quickened. "Your pony star," Emily said, blinking fast. "He vanished last spring. Folks told me he must have run off, but I know better. I saw that man lead him away." The barn seemed to grow colder. Claire's mind leapt to the name Mrs. Carver had spat with such venom. Jake Holloway. They sat on the porch steps, later the notebook balanced on Emily's knees. She flipped to a sketch, a rough drawing of a stocky pony with a white blaze across its forehead. Her pencil strokes were uneven, but the love behind them was clear. "That was Stars," Emily said softly. "He followed me everywhere. I woke up one morning and he was gone. I went looking and I saw him, this man. Big with a scruffy beard, eyes like ice. He was leading Star into a trailer. He saw me too. Smiled. Then he drove off in this old green truck." Claire felt her jaw lock. Every detail matched the whispers about Jake. Emily wiped her nose with her sleeve. "I told people. No one believed me. They said I dreamed it." She looked up at Claire, eyes fierce now. But it was real. "And he's been back. I saw him near the ridge 2 nights ago." Claire's skin prickled. That explained the noises, the tracks, Midnight's panic. She placed a steady hand on Emily's shoulder. "Thank you for telling me. I believe you." That night, Claire couldn't bring herself to sleep. She sat by the window, revolver within reach, lantern low. Midnight shifted restlessly in her stall, occasionally stamping her hooves as if she could sense the unease coiling through the valley. The hours dragged. Wind rattled loose shingles on the roof. Far off, a pack of coyotes yipped their cries, stretching thin across the hills. Then came a different sound. Metallic sharp, the jangle of chain against chain close to the barn. Claire was on her feet instantly, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other. Midnight screamed a high tearing whinny that echoed through the rafters. Her hooves struck wood with such force that the entire stall shook. Claire bolted out the back door, the beam of her flashlight slicing through the dark. Rain had begun to fall light, but icy pattering against her jacket. She swept the light across the yard over the fences. For a heartbeat, she caught it, a figure tall and broad, slipping between the trees. The beam caught only the flash of a coat, the pale curve of a face turning away. Then he vanished into the forest. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but she didn't fire. The distance was too great, and a bullet into darkness solved nothing. Instead, she stood there, chest heaving rain, soaking her hair, listening to the pounding of her own heart. Whoever it was hadn't come to steal tonight. He'd come to remind her, to let her know midnight was still wanted. Claire lowered the gun slowly and turned back. Midnight was trembling foam on her lips, eyes wild. Claire pushed into the stall, laid both hands against the mare's neck, feeling the thunder of her pulse. "Not on my watch, girl," she whispered fiercely, pressing her forehead to the coarse mane. "Not ever again." The storm swallowed her words, but midnight stilled just enough. The first warning came in the afternoon when the light over Echo Valley dimmed without the sun truly setting. Clouds gathered above the ridges, thick and rolling, turning the whole sky into a bruised mass of black and slate. By early evening, the wind had picked up, sweeping through the pine trees with a sound like a restless tide. Claire felt the shift immediately. Living in the mountains meant learning to read the air, how stillness could mean danger, how sudden gusts meant storms creeping over the peaks. This was no passing shower. The valley braced itself, and so did she. She was tightening the boards on the stall when the first thunder cracked. It wasn't a distant rumble, but a violent shudder that rattled the roof beams. Lightning followed jagged and merciless, spilling white across the ranch yard. The storm broke open. Rain hammered the roof in torrents, the downpour so loud it drowned even the creaking of the old barn. Wind screamed through broken shingles, slamming the shutters on the house so hard they rattled like gunfire. The old fence groaned under each gust, rails giving way one by one. Claire dashed through the barn with rope and hammer, lashing doors shut, pulling tarps across the worst leaks. When she reached Midnight's stall, the mare was drenched in sweat, though no rain had touched her. Her sides heaved violently, belly rippling with spasms. Claire froze, her chest tightening. She knew that look. She'd seen it once before, years ago at a ranger station when a Mustang had gone into labor on transport. This wasn't agitation from the storm. Midnight was in labor. "God," Claire whispered, pressing a hand to the trembling flank. "Not now, not in this storm." But there was no stopping it. Her fingers shook as she yanked her phone from her pocket. The signal wavered one bar, flashing in and out. She pressed speed dial anyway, praying it would connect. Dr. Evelyn Ross answered on the second ring, her voice muffled by static. "Dawson, you picked a fine night to call." She's in labor," Claire said breathlessly. "Midnight. It's happening now." The line crackled. "Listen to me carefully. You can't move her in this weather. You'll have to guide her through. Claire swallowed, staring at the mare's quivering body. I've never done this. You'll do it tonight. Evelyn's tone was sharp, steady. Clear the straw. Lay down blankets clean if you have them. Sterilize a knife if you've got one. And keep towels ready. You'll need to wipe the foals down the moment they come out. Claire nodded, even though Evelyn couldn't see. All right. Okay. Her hands moved faster than her mind. She swept the stall clear, dragged in dry blankets from the supply trunk, tore open the old emergency kit she kept from ranger days. She laid everything out within reach, her breath coming fast, her palms clammy. The mare screamed, then a raw, powerful whinny that rose above the thunder. Claire steadied herself, heart pounding. She wasn't ready, but neither was Midnight. That didn't matter. The storm didn't wait. The first contraction hit hard. Midnight staggered, her hooves scraping against the stall muscles, rippling down her flanks. Claire kept to her side, whispering, trying to soothe. You're all right, girl. You're all right. I've got you. The first foal came quick but silent, sliding onto the straw in a slick tangle. Claire's stomach clenched when she saw no movement, no sound. Now Evelyn barked through the phone speaker, her voice strained with interference. Clear the airway, rub it down. Claire dropped to her knees, grabbing one of the towels. She wiped furiously, the tiny muzzle clearing fluid rubbing across the slick chest. The foal lay still. Come on, Claire urged, rubbing harder, pressing her palms over the fragile ribs. Breathe. For a heartbeat, she thought she had lost it. Then with a shudder, the foal released a small, gasping whinny, weak but alive. Relief slammed through her so hard she nearly sobbed. There you go, she whispered fiercely, pulling the foal close to Midnight's side. There you go. The second birth didn't come as easily. Midnight's sides heaved, but minutes stretched into eternity with no progress. The mare's legs buckled once, nearly collapsing. Claire clutched her shoulder, panic rising. She's too tired, Claire cried into the phone. Listen to me. Evelyn's voice cut through the static. When she pushes, you pull gently but firmly. Do you understand? Guide the foal out. Claire dropped the phone to speaker mode, set it on the ground, and braced herself. Midnight pushed weakly, groaning, and Claire grasped the slick legs protruding, pulling with trembling strength. Now pull, Evelyn shouted. Claire heaved. The foal slid free in a rush of fluid and blood collapsing into her arms with terrifying limpness. Claire's heart nearly stopped until she saw a flicker of movement, legs twitching, head lifting weakly. She laughed breathlessly, half sob, half disbelief. 2. We've got 2. Midnight sagged her body, trembling with exhaustion, eyes glazed. Claire pressed her forehead against the mare's neck. Stay with me, girl. Just one more. The third foal took longer. Much longer. Midnight strained her body, convulsing, but nothing came. The storm outside battered the barn's lightning, throwing wild shadows across the rafters. Claire's own strength waned, arms, aching sweat and rainwater mingling down her face. When at last the third foal slipped free, it didn't move. No, Claire whispered, panic spiking sharp, and she bent low, pressing her ear against the tiny chest. No beat. Breathe for it, Evelyn barked. Do it now, Claire didn't hesitate. She covered the foal's nose with her mouth, blowing air, then rubbed furiously at its chest, praying. Come on, damn you, fight nothing. She blew again, harder, until her lungs burned. Her hands trembled as she massaged its ribs, desperate. Please. Then a twitch. A faint shudder. A weak, rasping whimper that cut through the storm. Claire gasped, laughter bursting with relief. Yes, that's it. She held the fold close, tears streaming, shaking so hard she could barely keep her grip. 3. All 3 were alive. When it was over, Claire collapsed onto the straw, soaked to the bone, trembling with exhaustion. Midnight slumped too, her body shivering with weakness, but her eyes had changed. They gleamed now bright and wet, filled with something almost luminous. Slowly, painfully, the mare turned her head and began to lick each foal in turn. She nudged them closer to her belly, curling her massive frame protectively around them. One by one, the foals whimpered, nuzzled, and found her teats. Their weak cries filled the stall like fragile bells. Claire pressed a hand over her mouth, sobbing quietly. The storm outside still raged, lightning, flashing rain, hammering, but inside the barn, new life breathed. Against everything, against chains and scars and storms they had survived. "You did it, girl," Claire whispered through tears, stroking Midnight's damp mane. "We both did." The storm began to fade near dawn. Rain slowed to a drizzle, thunder rolling away into distant mountains. The barn smelled of straw, sweat, and something cleaner, the scent of life, raw and undeniable. Claire lit a lantern, setting it near the stall. Its glow washed over the scene. Midnight, lying curled around her young, the foals nestled against her belly, their coats still damp, but rising and falling with breath. Claire leaned against the wooden post, utterly spent, her limbs heavy. She hadn't felt such bone-deep relief in years. Her heart, so long hardened, ached with a strange new warmth. Her phone buzzed weakly. Evelyn again. "How are they?" the vet asked, her voice hoarse with fatigue. Claire closed her eyes, let the words fall out in a shaky whisper. "Alive. All 3. There was silence on the line, then Evelyn's soft exhale. "Then you did enough. Hold them close. I'll come as soon as the road's clear." Claire hung up, wiping her face. She looked upward through the barn's broken roof, where thin strips of pale sky appeared between torn shingles. The wind whistled low, not menacing now, but steady like breath. She pressed a hand against Midnight's neck one last time, then leaned back, letting herself breathe fully. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt full. Something larger than herself had begun here in the wreck of an old barn on a night when the valley roared with storm. New life had come through darkness. And for the first time since fire had taken everything from her, Claire Dawson believed again. The storm had scoured the valley clean, leaving behind a brittle stillness. Pine branches littered the ground, fences sagged where rails had snapped, and Echo Valley Ranch smelled of wet earth and smoke. Inside the house, the air was still damp with the storm's breath. Claire moved slowly through the old study, sweeping aside debris that had fallen from the ceiling, her body heavy with exhaustion after the night she'd endured. Midnight and her foals were alive. Against every odd, they had survived. That fact alone steadied Claire's heart. But beneath the relief hummed another current suspicion memory, a nagging sense that the ranch still held pieces of a puzzle she hadn't yet solved. She opened the warped drawers of a desk pressed against the far wall. Dust puffed up in small clouds, coating her hands and nose. Most of what she found was worthless old receipts, yellowed scraps of newspaper, a half-empty tin of nails. But the bottom drawer resisted. She yanked, coughing as dust rained down, and at last it slid open with a squeal of rusted metal. Inside lay a small, leather-bound book, its cover cracked and peeling the spine barely holding. The pages inside were yellow edges, curling with age. Claire carried it to the window, letting the gray morning light spill over it, and began to read. At first it seemed ordinary names, dates. Then her stomach clenched. Each entry listed horses. Not just their names, but numbers, codes, ages, coat colors, sex, and prices. Some names had thick red lines drawn through them, followed by words like shipped or unfit, disposed. Her hand tightened around the brittle pages. This wasn't a record of care. It was a ledger. Claire snapped her phone from her pocket and took photos of every page, her fingers shaking. When she finished, she slid the journal into a bag and drove straight into town. Dr. Evelyn Ross set her glasses low on her nose, flipping through the photographed pages with growing disgust. Her sharp features tightened until her lips were nothing but a pale line. "These are transaction logs," Evelyn said flatly. "Claire, this isn't adoption. This is commerce." Claire's throat was dry. "But a rescue center." The vet cut her off with a bitter laugh. "A rescue doesn't list animals like cattle in an auction yard. Look at the numbers. Healthy yearlings listed for thousands. Mares priced higher when pregnant. This is a supply chain." She tapped a finger against one column. "And here, these codes, I've seen them before. Microchip IDs. Some matchdogs and horses we've recovered in cruelty cases." Claire felt nausea twist her stomach. So Midnight wasn't just a victim. She was merchandise. Evelyn met her eyes. Yes. And if she made it back here, it wasn't by chance. Someone let her slip or she escaped. But she was part of it. Claire clenched her fists so tight, her nails bit her palms. The storm hadn't washed the valley clean at all. It had only uncovered its rot. That night, Claire pored over the journal again, forcing herself to study every scribble and code. One recurring set of letters caught her eye, NER. She whispered the letters aloud, and realization struck. North Echo Animal Rescue. The name rang faint bells. She remembered a flyer she'd once seen in a ranger office years ago about a small rescue center up near the ridge. It had promised sanctuary for abandoned stock, had even made a local news piece. But it had vanished just as quickly closed without explanation. When she showed Evelyn, the older woman only shook her head. That place, no license, no inspections. I suspected even then something was off. And it's been closed for years. But Claire couldn't let it go. She sought out Emily the next day, finding the girls sketching in the dirt near the fence line. She placed the journal in her lap. "Think you can help me with this?" Emily blinked, then leaned in with keen eyes. These look like coordinates. She pulled her phone from her hoodie pocket, fingers flying across the screen. "If you match them against the valley maps." Claire watched as the girl pieced numbers together, pulling up satellite images. After a moment, Emily jabbed a finger at the screen. "There," she said. "North side of the forest. Looks like an old compound. Matches the letters too, NEAR." Claire exhaled. So it's real. Emily bit her lip. "If that's where they took Star, I want to see it." Claire hesitated, then nodded grimly. "We'll face it together." The forest greeted them the next morning with a skin of fog clinging low across the ground. Claire wore her ranger jacket, revolver at her hip, a flashlight and rope slung over her shoulder. Emily carried a backpack stuffed with water bottles, granola bars, and a small sketchbook she refused to leave behind. The air grew heavier as they hiked north. Pines thickened, blotting out the weak sunlight. Birds were absent, and the forest strangely silent, except for the crunch of their boots. Old wheel ruts cut across the dirt, half buried by moss, but still visible. Claire knelt and touched the tracks. "Trucks," she murmured. "Heavy ones." Emily swallowed hard. So it's true. They pushed deeper, each step weighted with anticipation. The forest path bent, narrowing until finally the trees opened into a small clearing. There, slouched between sagging pines, stood a long building of weathered timber. A rusted sign swung crooked above the entry, its letters faint but legible, North Echo Animal Rescue. temporarily closed. At first glance, it could almost fool you. Posters clung to the outer wall, smiling children beside foals, cheerful slogans about adoption. Weeds had crept across the steps' vines, twisting up the siding, the whole facade playing at benign neglect. But the moment Claire pushed the door open, the illusion shattered. The hallway reeked of rust, mold, and old waste. The floor was littered with straw blackened by time. Metal cages lined the walls, their bars corroded and streaked with something darker, blood dried to a brown crust. Scratch marks climbed the metal deep grooves, gouged by hooves and teeth in desperate frenzy. Emily covered her nose, her voice muffled. It looks like they just walked away. Claire shook her head, grim. No. This place was scrubbed, left empty when they didn't need it anymore. They moved slowly from room to room. In one, a row of empty feeding troughs. In another, small pens with numbered tags still swinging on rusted hooks. Claire recognized the codes instantly, the same as those in the ledger. Her stomach knotted. These stalls hadn't been meant for shelter. They were inventory. At the far end of the hall, they found what had once been an office. A desk sagged under the weight of mold-stained paper. Claire rifled through until she found a plastic-wrapped folder, waterlogged but intact. She peeled it open and stared. Export forms. Certificates of transport with forged seals. Short contracts signed only with initials J.H. Jake Holloway. Beside the desk sat cardboard boxes collapsed under dampness. She opened one and froze. Inside were photographs. One after another, grainy prints of horses crammed into metal trailers, eyes wide with terror, bodies pressed so tightly their ribs bulged against the bars. Some lay collapsed under the weight of others. Each image was stamped with a date, a code, a destination. Emily reached shakily for one photo, then gasped. "That star," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That's him. See the blaze on his forehead? I'd know it anywhere." Her fingers clutched the photo until it crumpled. Tears welled in her eyes, anger twisting her small face. They took him. They really took him. Claire's throat closed. She gathered the papers, the photographs, the contracts, tucking them into her bag with trembling hands. Every page, every image was proof. Proof that the ledger was real. Proof that Jake Holloway's hands were stained with more than rumor. Proof that Midnight hadn't simply been a survivor. She had been a prisoner escaped from a network that still lingered in the valley's shadows. The building was almost silent after Claire stuffed the last of the files into her satchel. Only the occasional drip of water from the roof broke the stillness. Emily lingered near the doorway, her sketchbook pressed tight against her chest, her eyes wide. Claire was about to suggest they head back when she heard it faint, muffled, almost too soft to be real. A sound that didn't belong to the creak of timber or the scurry of mice. She froze. "Did you hear that?" Emily nodded, her face pale. It sounded like someone. The noise came again, a cough weak and hoarse from deeper down the corridor. Claire exchanged a quick glance with Emily, then pulled her revolver from its holster. They followed the sound toward a metal door chained shut at the end of the hall. Rust had eaten through most of the padlock. Claire pressed her ear against the cold surface. On the other side, breathing shallow, labored. She stepped back, lifted her flashlight, and brought the butt of the revolver down hard against the lock. Once, twice, until it cracked. With a groan, the door swung inward. The smell hit first stale air, sweat, and mildew. Then her beam caught the figure inside. A woman thin to the point of frailty, huddled in the corner of a narrow room. Her clothes were torn, her hair a tangled curtain around a face lined with exhaustion. But her eyes, sunken though they were, burned with sharp awareness. She flinched back as the light fell across her raising, trembling hands. "No, please, I'll work, just don't take me." Claire holstered her weapon quickly, lowering her voice. "Easy. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to get you out." The woman blinked, disoriented. Emily stepped forward hesitantly, her small voice breaking through the quiet. "It's you," she whispered. "You're the girl in the photo? The one with Midnight." At the sound of the name, the woman's whole body jerked. Tears welled suddenly in her hollow eyes. Her lips moved as if forming the word silently midnight. They half carried her out of the building through the mist-thick forest and back toward the ranch. Elena Gray said little on the trek, her strength failing with every step. But the moment the barn doors opened, everything changed. Midnight lifted her head. She inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. Then with a cry that was half scream, half song, she lunged forward, the stall door rattling against its hinges. Elena broke from Claire's grasp and stumbled across the straw. She fell to her knees as the massive mare pressed against her, the force nearly knocking her backward. Elena buried her arms around the thick neck, sobbing into the coarse mane. "I thought I'd never see you again," she cried. "I thought you were gone." Midnight nickered low, the sound trembling through the rafters, and pushed her muzzle into Elena's chest. Her great body trembled, as if she too had carried years of grief to this moment. Claire and Emily stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak. The reunion unfolded before them like something sacred, woman and horse clinging to each other, both survivors of the same shadow. Emily wiped at her eyes, whispering, "It's real. It's really her." Later, in the warm glow of the ranch kitchen, Elena sat wrapped in a quilt while Claire brewed tea. Emily hovered close, unwilling to leave her side. Slowly, hesitantly, Elena began to speak. Her voice was fragile at first, cracking from disuse. "I bought the ranch 10 years ago. Echo Valley. I wanted a sanctuary. Mustangs, abandoned stock, the broken ones no one wanted." She closed her eyes, remembering. "For a while it worked. I had volunteers. We built fences, patched barns. Midnight came to me then, young, strong, unbroken. She was everything I dreamed of. I thought we were building something good." Her hands tightened on the quilt. Then Jake Holloway arrived. He called himself an investor. Promised funding trailers, better equipment. At first I believed him. More horses came in. But soon I saw the truth. They weren't rescued. They were inventory. Claire's chest tightened. The journal. Elena nodded miserably. They evaluated them like property weight, breeding, potential market price. When I objected, he laughed, said dreams don't pay bills. When I tried to stop him, her voice broke. Emily reached out, gripping her hand. What did he do? Elena swallowed, tears streaking down her dirt-stained cheeks. He locked me away, said I loved them too much to let them die, so I'd work for him instead. I cleaned their wounds, fed them, kept them alive, until they were shipped out. I watched trailer after trailer leave. Horses that would never come back. She buried her face in her hands. I was supposed to save them, and I couldn't. I couldn't save any of them. Silence stretched heavy with the weight of her confession. The storm outside had long faded, but its echoes lingered in her words. Finally, Elena lifted her head and eyes shining with grief. Midnight was different. She was the finest we had. Strong, beautiful, too wild for them to break. Jake wanted her for breeding for sale to the highest bidder. Her voice trembled, but a small fire lit within it. One night there was chaos. Another horse panicked, kicked down a gate. In the confusion, Midnight rammed the fence, broke through. She ran into the woods. I thought I thought she'd die out there. But she survived. And she came back here, to me, to this place. Elena's tears spilled again, but her lips trembled into something like a smile. She came back as if she knew, as if she carried the truth home with her. Claire felt her throat tighten. She looked toward the barn window where Midnight's silhouette shifted against the lantern light. The mare stood tall, her foals nestled at her side. Proof of survival. Proof of defiance. Claire leaned forward, placing a firm hand on Elena's shoulder. We'll end what he started. Together. Elena's eyes lifted, wet and hollow, but touched now with something else, hope. You mean that Claire's gaze didn't waver? I do. You're not alone anymore. Emily, who had been silent for a long while, suddenly spoke, her young voice cutting through with fierce clarity. She pointed to the satchel on the table stuffed with papers and photographs. We have proof. The journal, the files, and now, her. She turned to Elena. You're the one they can't ignore. For a moment, none of them spoke. The old kitchen clock ticked softly, the only sound besides the distant whicker of horses outside. Then something shifted between them. Three people, all scarred in different ways, bound by the same purpose. Claire Dawson, the ranger who had stumbled into a nightmare. Elena Gray, the survivor who carried years of stolen truth. Emily Hart, the girl whose innocence had been marred by loss, but whose fire had not been extinguished. A fragile alliance, perhaps, but enough to fight back. They sat together at the kitchen table, faces illuminated by the yellow glow of the lantern. Determination hardened their features, knitting them into a single resolve. Outside the window, Midnight stood in the paddock, her foals curled in the straw beneath her. The night was quiet, but it was not empty. It was full of promise, of survival, of the fight yet to come. And for the first time in years, Elena Gray believed she might live to see justice. The night before, they had spread the evidence across the kitchen table, papers and photographs weighted down by coffee mugs. Claire hadn't slept, none of them had. By dawn, the decision was made. It was time to take everything to Sheriff Tom Ridley. The Cedar Hollow Sheriff's Office sat on the corner of Main Street, a squat brick building that smelled of coffee and old leather. Ridley was already at his desk when they entered, the morning sun spilling across piles of paperwork. He was a thick-set man in his late 50s, his once dark hair silvered at the edges. Years of dealing with ranch disputes and drunken brawls at the tavern had worn grooves into his face, and when he saw the satchel in Claire's hand, his brow furrowed deeper. You're asking me to open a case? People buried a decade ago, he said after flipping through the journal, the transport forms and the photographs. His voice was gravel, his eyes unreadable. Do you know what kind of men Holloway's tied to Claire? Stood firm. I know enough, and now you do too. If you turn away, you're part of it. Ridley's jaw flexed, his fingers drumming against the desk. Elena leaned forward, her voice ragged but unyielding. He kept me prisoner, Sheriff. You want me to disappear again? Pretend I was never here? The room went still. Ridley looked at her, really looked, and the weight of her words settled in. With a curse under his breath, he slapped his palm flat on the desk. Damn it. Fine, we'll bring him in. For the first time, Claire saw it, the shift from doubt to action. The wall of silence was cracking. They came for Jake Holloway the next evening. His ranch sat on the outskirts, sprawling and pristine in contrast to Echo Valley's ruin. A convoy of sheriff's deputies moved in under cover of dusk headlights, off radios low. Claire stood to the side, her pulse hammering as Ridley's men fanned out around the house. Jake emerged onto the porch just as they closed in. He was dressed in a leather jacket, a cigar smoldering between his fingers, his smirk unshaken even as the deputies raised their weapons. "Well, well," he drawled as Ridley read the warrant. "You boys must be desperate. It's just horses. Property. You can't jail a man for that." The cuffs clicked around his wrists. He didn't resist, he laughed. Claire stepped forward, her eyes cold as steel. "We'll see what the court thinks." Jake's smile didn't falter, but something flickered in his eyes as they led him to the waiting car. Word spread faster than wildfire. By the time the trial opened a week later, Cedar Hollow was buzzing. The courthouse brimmed with people townsfolk who'd whispered about Echo Valley for years, reporters with cameras slung around their necks, ranchers with hard eyes and folded arms. Claire sat near the front beside Elena and Emily, her nerves tight as wire. Across the aisle, Jake took his place at the defendant's table. He was scrubbed clean for the occasion-tailored charcoal suit tie knotted perfectly beard-trimmed. He leaned back in his chair, looking as though he owned the room. The prosecutor rose, voice steady, and read the charges: illegal trafficking of livestock, animal cruelty, unlawful imprisonment, falsification of documents. Jake's attorney scoffed. These animals were abandoned stock. My client simply collected and sold them legally. A service, really. Claire clenched her fists. She saw it in Jake's face, the way he sat unbothered, as if every soul in the courtroom were just another ledger entry. To him, nothing had changed. The witnesses came next. Elena Gray was the first to take the stand. She walked slowly, her thin frame stiff with nerves. But when she sat and faced the jury, her eyes hardened. Her voice trembled at the start, but grew stronger with each word. "I watched horses taken away in trucks," she said, her hands twisting in her lap. "Some came back broken. Most never returned. He locked me up because I tried to stop him. For years I lived in the dark cleaning wounds, feeding the ones he didn't care to touch. I begged him to stop. He told me pain was just part of profit." The courtroom fell into silence so heavy it was suffocating. Next was Emily Hart. She looked impossibly small in the witness chair, her hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands. But when the prosecutor handed her the ledger, she flipped to a page with steady fingers. "That was my horse," she said, her young voice clear. "Star. He had a white blaze on his forehead. I saw that man," she pointed at Jake, "lead him away. Folks said I was making it up. But it's here. His mark. His code." Tears pricked her eyes, but her jaw stayed firm. The jurors leaned forward, listening not to a child, but to someone who had lost more than they could fathom. Finally, Claire submitted the journal and the transport contracts they had found. Pages filled with numbers, red slashes, through names the words shipped and disposed. Photographs of terrified animals crammed into trucks. The evidence lay heavy on the table, a record of cruelty that could not be dismissed. The room held its breath. The lies whispered for years were suddenly fact, undeniable and sharp. On the third day of the trial, the prosecutor made a request. With the judge's approval, deputies opened the side doors of the courthouse. The crowd stirred as the sound of hooves echoed faintly on marble. Then she entered. Midnight. Her black coat gleamed under the harsh lights, though the scar on her flank caught every eye. She walked with a strength that made the room rise unconsciously straighter. Behind her, 3 foals trotted nervously, their legs wobbly, but their energy undeniable. Gasps rippled across the benches. Cameras clicked. Even the judge leaned forward. Jake's face changed. His smirk faltered, and for the first time, his composure cracked. He surged to his feet, slamming a fist on the table. "That's mine," he roared. "That mare belongs to me." Chaos erupted. Reporters shouted, townsfolk hissed, the judge's gavel banged for order. But the damage was done. In that unguarded moment, Jake Holloway revealed himself not a businessman, not an investor, but a man who saw life only as property, a commodity to be owned. The jury saw it. So did everyone else. Midnight stood tall through the commotion, her foals pressing close to her legs. She didn't flinch. Her gaze swept the room calm and unyielding, as though she were delivering her own testimony. The trial stretched for days. Witness after witness, piece after piece of evidence. When the jury finally filed, back in the air in the courtroom was electric. The tension wound so tight it could snap. The foreman rose, his voice steady. "We find the defendant, Jake Holloway, guilty on all counts: animal cruelty, illegal trafficking, unlawful imprisonment, forgery." Judge Evelyn Drake adjusted her glasses, her tone cool and unwavering. "Mr. Holloway, this court sentences you to 30 years in state prison. You will also pay restitution to the Animal Rescue Trust to aid in the care of those harmed by your actions." Jake lunged against the deputies, holding him, spitting fury. "This town needed me. Without me, you're nothing." No one listened. The crowd's murmur rose, a low tide of relief and disbelief, as the man who had haunted Echo Valley for a decade was dragged away. Claire glanced across the room. Elena sat trembling but upright, tears streaking her face. Emily clutched the strap of her notebook like a lifeline. Midnight waited in the hallway, her foals prancing, the scar on her side, no longer a mark of shame, but of survival. For the first time, Cedar Hollow felt lighter. The shadow had been lifted. For a few days after the verdict, Cedar Hollow moved as if under a new sky. The air felt taller. People looked up when they walked. A weight had lifted, one they hadn't noticed until it was gone. News vans rolled out of town. The courthouse steps swept clean of trampled flyers, and cigarette butts shone under a pale sun. Out at Echo Valley Ranch, the place once spoken about only in wary whispers, hammers began to sing. It started with a pair of brothers from the feed store who parked their truck by the gate and unloaded a ladder and 2 tarps. "We'll fix the south slope of the roof by dusk," the older said, securing the ladder to a warped beam. "Can't have rain ruining those foals." A day later, a history teacher arrived with his teenage son and a post-hole digger. Behind them came a retired carpenter and his granddaughter wheeling a box of paint. Someone donated a generator. Someone else dropped off shingles. The ranch grew loud with good noise, the kind that made a body straighten, the kind that chased out old echoes. Claire worked among them, sleeves-rolled boots, packed with dust, a coil of nails on her hip. She climbed ladders, she measured, she hammered until her arms ached in the good familiar way work can ache. The past had once filled her hands with smoke. Now it fitted them with tools. "Hold it steady," she called down to Emily, who steadied a crooked porch post. The girl, still in her oversized hoodie but with a new brightness around the eyes, braced her small shoulder against the wood, while Claire aligned a brace and drove home a long screw. "Think it'll stay this time?" Emily asked, wind-teasing loose strands of red hair across her cheeks. "It'll stay," Claire said. "We're building for weather." By week's end, the main house had a roof that no longer sighed in strong wind. The porch stood honest on its posts. The barn walls, once gray with rot, wore a coat of clean paint. Fences rose again from earth they knew well, posts set straight, rails tight and true. When the last rail went into place, a dozen hands lingered there a moment, palms resting along the smooth grain, as if the oak itself were breathing. On a Saturday thick with sunlight, Elena stepped back to look over the front gate. A cluster of volunteers surrounded her, paint on their forearms and cheeks. In the bed of a pickup, a craftsman carved letters into a plank of plain cedar. Under his hands, the name took shape, each stroke steady Midnight Haven. below in smaller script, "Shelter for the Forgotten." Elena wiped at her eyes with the heel of her hand and laughed at herself. "Wood chips," she said when Claire smiled at her. "They always get me." "They get in everyone's eyes," Claire said gently. She reached up with a level while the sign was hoisted and fastened over the gate. When it settled at last, true centered warm against the sky, someone started clapping. The applause swelled and broke like a little wave. A few folks cheered. Even the quiet ones smiled. For years, this land had been a door locked from the outside. Now it swung open. The words over the gate were not just a name. They were a vow. Inside the replanked barn, the work shifted from timber to breath and pulse. Elena moved easily among the stalls, as if she'd always belonged to the rhythm of hooves. Strength had returned slowly to her limbs, steadied by rest and the certainty that she would not be dragged back into shadow. She carried a ledger of her own, now not numbers and export codes, but feed schedules, wound checks, training notes, personality quirks. She wrote in a tidy hand, "Bay mare shy with strangers, trust built through quiet touch. Gray gelding food guarding feed in corner, then approach." "You know them like people," Emily said, peering over her shoulder. "They are people," Elena answered, not looking up. Her mouth curved with a knowledge that had cost too much to be called anything but truth. Just a different nation. Claire handled coordination, the phone calls, the permits, the calendars, the steady churn of logistics that keep a living place from collapsing. In the mornings, she drove to the ranger station, signed incident reports, checked trail conditions. In the afternoons, she returned with a truck bed full of hay or bags of mineral salt, or with nothing but her breath and her hands. She learned to live between two callings without apology, protector of wildlands, steward of souls. Dr. Evelyn Ross became their anchor in the storms that bodies weather. She conducted clinics on the long table in the refurbished tack room, teaching volunteers how to listen for lungs, how to palpate for pain, how to clean a wound without turning tenderness into fuss. "Pressure here," she'd say, guiding a young man's fingers along a tendon. "Let the animal tell you the story. Your job is to hear it before it becomes a shout." When the town's high school asked if students could volunteer for community credit, Evelyn drew up a triage chart in block letters and colored tape. It looked like a battlefield map, and in a way, it was only the war was against neglect and against the long shadow of habit. She insisted on hands-washed tools, sterilized voices low. "Respect is a form of medicine," she told them. "Use it generously." Emily, youngest of the core team and fierce without trying, discovered that the world beyond Cedar Hollow cared about stories told honestly. She set up a social page for Midnight Haven and posted photographs that did what facts alone sometimes failed to do. They made people feel. She wrote short captions, refusing to yield to pity dandelion. 2 months learning the world is wide enough for running. Rufus, retired ranch gelding, prefers apples to pears and naps to work. Donations arrived in small, loving amounts. $5 from a woman in Kansas, $20 from a firefighter in Oregon, a handwritten letter with a single $20 bill for the foals. My father taught me to listen for hooves in the rain. At first, the town watched. People who had once rolled their eyes at the $1 ranch drove by slowly, windows down their glances, wary, curious, careful. Skepticism is a form of self-protection Cedar Hollow had learned to brace for disappointment. But a thing that stands and keeps standing becomes hard to ignore. A mechanic fixed Claire's truck and refused payment. "You'll pay me in oats," he said, grinning. A baker dropped off loaves on Wednesdays with a note. "For the crew, eat before you fall over." A church youth group showed up with brushes, and by evening the long fence that faced the road gleamed in fresh white. In the feed store, someone pinned a flyer near the register Saturday workdays at Midnight Haven. All hands welcome. No horse experience required. Heart recommended. When the county inspector came to review their paperwork orders and bylaws crisp in a folder, he stood beneath the new sign a long time. His eyes moved across the yard, over the fences, into the barn, where soft knickers rose and fell like a choir warming up. "You've done something here," he said at last, voice thick. "Good to write yes instead of no for once." He signed his name with a flourish, then shook Claire's hand and Elena's, and even smiled at Emily, who beamed back as if she'd been given a medal. After that, the rhythm steadied into something like normal. The ranch breathed a living lung. Morning feed, midday checks, afternoon turnout. Volunteers clicked through routines like well-oiled gears. Children laughed on Saturdays. Old men leaned on the fence and argued about the merits of Timothy hay versus alfalfa until a patient mare nosed their pockets for treats and made philosophers of them both. Through it all, Midnight watched. She had regained weight. Her coat shone again. The scar on her flank would never vanish, and no one asked it to. It had become what the land itself had become testimony. Her 3 foals' bright, improbable proofs grew quickly on legs that hardly belonged to them, then suddenly did. They chased one another across the paddock as if they discovered a joke they could never quite finish. The morning the new pasture opened, the town turned out. Word had quietly spread, first turnout. The phrase felt ceremonial, and maybe it was. Sun came early, gilding the valley in a way that made even old things look newly made. Volunteers lined the fence with coffee in hand and their breath making small clouds. The carpenter who'd carved the gate brought his camera but forgot to raise it when the moment came. Dr. Ross stood near the gate hands, tucked into her coat, eyes bright. The sheriff was there too, hat in hand, at a respectful distance. Claire and Elena walked side by side to the barn. It was quiet inside, not with the silence of fear, but with the hush before music. "Ready?" Claire asked. Elena took a breath that trembled only once. "Ready?" They slid the stall latch. Midnight flicked an ear, lifted her head, and stepped forward with polite gravity, as if she understood the terms of the ceremony. Behind her, the 3 foals bunched like a small storm. The gate swung open to the pasture, a long sweep of green stitched with new oat grass. The first to bolt was the boldest foal, a bay, with a startle of white along his nose. He shot forward like a thrown arrow, tail high. The second, a softer-eyed filly, leapt, then slowed into a bouncing trot. The third, the smallest, hesitated until his sibling's joy dragged him into it, and then he ran with a lick of defiance, legs flashing. Laughter broke along the fence line. A small child clapped until his palms reddened. An old woman pressed a hand to her chest and murmured, "Well, look at that." Midnight stepped into the light last. For a breath, she stood there black against the green, every line of her speaking. She moved, then not a gallop, not yet, but a sure-footed, long-backed canter that said yes to a question only she could hear. The sunlight found her scar and made a thin river of it across her flank. It did not mar her. It named her. She gathered her foals with a sound so soft, only those nearest heard it, a low velvet call. They came. They circled. They ran again. No one cheered just then. The sound that rose was quieter, rawer air, drawn and released in wonder. It felt private, though they stood shoulder to shoulder. Claire stayed by the gate, one hand on the top rail, a spot of paint still flecked on her knuckles. The wind carried the sweetness of cut hay, and something wilder underneath a note that always made her throat ache. In the field, the foals wheeled and chased their own shadows, discovering how speed could stitch a creature into the world. Elena turned to her eyes shining. Claire didn't look away from the pasture as she spoke, voice low, almost swallowed by the morning. Sometimes, she said, the wild comes back to save us. Elena let out a breath that was halfway to a laugh and halfway to a sob. She wiped her cheek with the back of her wrist. And sometimes we're smart enough to let it. Across the way, Emily hugged her sketchbook to her chest. She had drawn this scene a dozen different ways in the weeks since the trial, but the reality outran her pencil. "We'll never forget," she whispered into the paper, as if the page could keep a promise too. Her fingers traced the outline of a filly in motion. Then she lifted her eyes and watched, instead of recording the way a person does when they realize the moment is bigger than the keeping of it. Dr. Ross stood silent as always in the presence of something fragile and fierce. Her hand drifted to her limp knee, rubbing at old pain, then fell away. The lines of her face softened. "Good work," her expression said without speaking. "The kind that lasts." By noon, the pasture sang with hoofbeats. The foals pressed noses into grass still wet with dew. Midnight grazed near the lower fence, pausing now and then to lift her head and take stock of wind of fence lines of the leaning congregation at the rail. A few townspeople had brought lunches, and with that uniquely human instinct to build picnics where there is joy, spread blankets along the fence. A boy in a ball cap tried to mimic a whinny. It came out like a squeak, and everyone laughed, and he tried again, because trying again had become a good habit in Cedar Hollow. "Remember when we called this place cursed?" the feed store brothers said to no one in particular. "Place was never cursed," the retired carpenter answered, eyes on the field. "It was waiting for us to quit being cowards." "Speak for yourself," someone else chuckled. They ate in easy company. They stood, then sat, then stood again, without quite realizing it, unwilling to leave the site. The day lengthened, bright and clean-edged. A hawk wheeled high above, riding a draft. It tilted once, twice, and moved on. Toward late afternoon, the foals tired. Their steps shortened. Their heads drooped. They leaned sleep-soft against one another and folded down in the grass. Midnight remained standing dark and sure above them, the way a mountain stands above a valley. The sight quieted whatever laughter remained. It had a way of doing that clipping loose talk and letting only the essential remain. Claire circled the fence, checking for spots that might snag a leg or invite a misstep. It was a habit now, like checking the stove, like locking a door. When she came back to the gate, Sheriff Ridley was there, hat back on his head, hands hooked on the rail. "You were right," he said, not looking at her, not looking away from the field either. About a lot of things, Claire said. He grunted a sound that could mean half a dozen feelings in a man like him. "Town's different," he went on. "Hard to say how, but it is. It'll keep being different if we let it," Claire said. "If we keep choosing it." He nodded once, a small and therefore meaningful concession. "We'll help," he said. And when he left, he did so without ceremony, which in Cedar Hollow's dialect meant the promise was a real one. The sun began its slow descent. Shadows stretched long and thin across the pasture, knitting light to dark. Volunteers drifted away with waves and see you Tuesdays. The baker reclaimed her baskets. The brothers loaded their ladder and promised to return with a tractor. The teacher's son lingered at the fence until his father called him reluctant, because leaving is harder when the view is better. Inside the barn, the tack room glowed with lamplight. Elena tidied the shelves not because they needed it, but because it allowed her hands to keep pace with her heart. Emily rinsed brushes at the pump, humming a tune that had no words. Dr. Ross logged notes in her precise block print, first turnout successful, herd behavior appropriate. No signs of distress. She underlined appropriate twice as if to tell the future that today had met the standard and tomorrow should try to keep up. Claire stepped out alone into the cooling evening. The new sign over the gate Midnight Haven glowed softly where the last light caught it. She stood beneath it and looked back at the field. Midnight raised her head to meet the gaze, an old habit of sentries acknowledging each other at shift change. "Guard's yours at night," Claire said quietly. "I'll take morning." Wind moved through the oat grass, making a sound like a whispered hymn. It carried the clean, living smell of horses and rain-washed wood. In the far distance, a train called once long and melancholy, then passed on. Claire thought of the day she'd found the mare in the dark barn, of chains half buried in dirt, of a photograph curled at the edges. She thought of a judge's gavel and a man shouting the wrong kind of ownership. She thought of the first foal's thin, desperate breath on a thunder-lashed night. All of it lay behind her and around her and inside her, not as fire, but as heat, the kind that keeps a room warm long after flame has gone to ember. When Elena joined her at the gate, they didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. The field did the talking, and so did the scar on Midnight's flank, and so did the little heap of foals that twitched in sleep and kicked at dreamflies. "Do you ever wish you could forget?" Elena asked eventually, not turning her head. "No," Claire said. "I don't trust forgetting. It lets rot come back. I'd rather remember and keep mending." Elena breathed out. "Then let's keep mending." "We will," Claire said. "We are." Behind them, boots scuffed softly. Emily slipped between them to hook her elbows over the top rail chin on her hands. "I figured out the tagline for the website," she announced, the solemnity of a town crier on her face. "Where scars become stories?" "Is that too cheesy? It's perfect," Elena said, voice thick. Dr. Ross came last, standing a little apart, hands behind her back. "Your mare chose her herd well," she said to Claire, which might have meant any number of things, including people. Night finally came in full. A big sky settled over the valley, spangled and cold. The ranch lights glowed warm as hearths. In the field, Midnight lifted her head and gave one soft call counting. 1, 2, 3. The foal slept on, secure in the arithmetic of safety. Claire rested her palm on the top rail, feeling the faint vibration of hoofbeats in the ground, the day's signature still traveling underfoot. She looked toward the dark line of the trees that had once felt like walls. They looked like walls no longer. They looked like edges of a map filling in. Echo Valley Ranch had been a place of shadows iron and fear and the terrible quiet that follows a slammed door. Tonight, it was a place of breath, of choosing, of return. It would not be perfect. Fences would break again. Storms would come mean. Some animals would arrive too late for miracles. Some hearts would crack and not quite close all the way. But there was a sign over the gate now, letters cut deep enough to last, and people beneath it, willing to be stubborn for good. Claire stepped down from the fence and started toward the house. At the threshold, she turned once more. The field lay dark silver in moonlight. Far out, Midnight shifted her weight and looked back, a long look that held 1,000 unspoken things and one that did not need words at all. The wind rose, lifting the ends of Claire's hair, and carried across the pasture the bright, sweet sound of a young horse's whinny, a ribbon of music unspooled into night. It braided with the creak of settling boards, with the rustle of hay, with the small sounds that make a place not haunted but alive. In that braid, the town heard something like absolution. Claire smiled a clean line in the dark and went inside. The story did not end. It turned a page. Out in the field, hooves wrote the rest.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.